We're gonna talk about comics from Devil's Due. It's something you wondered if Talking Joe would ever do. I guess we'll explain it all to you. Gonna take some time to read the books we've never read. Oh.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe podcast, where today we will be talking about G.I. Joe versus Transformers Black Horizon. This is the fourth of the Devil's Due G.I. Joe Transformers crossovers. This is the last of them, number 4 from 2007. So we have already spoken to the artist Andrew Wildman all about the process for him of how it all came together and his techniques and all of those kind of good things. So we've touched on this a little bit already, but this episode we'll be doing our normal thing of digging into the details. So again, spoilers ahead for G.I. Joe versus Transformers 4 Black Horizon, which was a 2-issue miniseries from Devil's Due, January and February 2007. Devil's Due only collected it in a hardcover G.I. Joe versus Transformers Omnibus collection, which had the full 4 volumes. And then later on, it was collected as G.I. Joe versus Transformers Volume 3 from IDW in April 2013, which was both Art of War and Black Horizon. Now, inevitably, I will be saying Dark Horizon at some point because my brain can't seem to process it. I may have already done it once already, but there we go. Now, talking about Black Horizon with B will be none other than my co-host. It's a real American Tim, transforming from a desk into a person. Here he is.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners. Yes, let's talk about this miniseries.
So, creative team bringing us this comic were writer Tim Seeley, artist Andrew Wildman, colorists Wes Dzidba, and art Lyon, letterer Brian J. Crowley, and the Nemesis editor was Mike O'Sullivan. So when we spoke to artist Andrew Wildman, he said that the artist tag, what that meant was that he would essentially draw it in very fine, dark pencils, very tight pencils, which were then scanned, made darker, and were effectively inks. And I think possibly the standard kind of coloring from pencils technique is a little bit different in this circumstance because he kind of did his blue line pencils as the rough pencils, then light boxed over the top of those to get with a heavier pencil to get the finished pencil. So he's doing something close to inking via his technique anyway. So when you look at these pencils, these darkened pencils in the book, it does basically look like your standard inked line rather than just a pencil, as close as we might see with some of the other pencils only work around this era.
Yes, these lines are clean and crisp, and they do look like inked lines. They don't look broken or scratchy. There isn't a sort of a fade or a soft edge to them.
Very good. Then we also spoke to Tim Seeley about this series when we interviewed him a little while ago. So I'll just drop in here what he told us at the time.
We had artists that we knew we could work with that were going to be really good Transformers artists, which was the hardest thing to do, is find people who could draw Transformers. And we knew we wanted to do something big and crazy because the one that IDW had done, or Dreamwave, sorry.
Yeah, the World War II one.
Right.
Some bonkers.
And so we were kind of competing with them because they would do their own thing and we were trying to stand out from them. And so, but we started like competing with them, trying to do something different. And so we decided, let's just go bigger and crazier. And so the idea for the third one was like, I pitched it to Josh, was what if Serpentor was made out of Megatron and other Transformers. Like instead of being Julius Caesar or whatever, he's got Megatron. And so we used a part of the third one because originally the cameo that we had in 2 of Cobra La was like just a joke, because Hasbro's like, you don't use them. They're are sort of ashamed of them. We don't want to use them. So it was just like a joke. But then the third one, like, I don't know, it was fun and goofy and big, and it gave them lots of new toys to play with, right? Because there was, a Serpentor that transformed into a jet or whatever. So the fourth one then was like, Seeley, just do whatever the hell you want. And I was like, I'm bringing back Joe Colton, and I'm doing I'm doing the Yeti playset, and I'm doing Cobra La, and also Cobra La works for Unicron. I was like, just went crazy. Just,
In Andrew Wildman, you have someone who can definitely draw both.
Right. Yes. And then the pitch was, hey, we can get Andrew Wildman. As a kid, of course, I loved Andrew Wildman stuff. So I was like, yes, I'm going to write this for Andrew to go crazy on. And I don't know, like, fans don't always respond as well to stuff where you're just like, here's a ton of crazy ideas, let's have fun. They don't always respond to it that well, because I think sometimes they think you're not taking the thing they love seriously. But to me, that is the point, right? Like, these are a bunch of toys and you're just mashing them together like you're a kid. So that was always the appeal to me. And, the idea that essentially the Earth was seeded for Unicron's coming, and that Cobra La was kind of the caretakers, like that's fun as shit. And it was also kind of based on the original book, the Horizon, the one that introduced Shangri-La, and all that stuff, which was what Cobra La was based on anyway.
Lost Horizon?
Yeah, Lost Horizon. And then plus, that's why we call it Black Horizon. And then, of course, like the Cthulhu, the Lovecraftian elements. So it's just like a nerdy horror kid getting to do the stuff that, was implied but not explicit in those creations. I mean, definitely Unicron is basically Lovecraft Transformers, and definitely Cobra La is the same thing. It's the cult, it's the people becoming fish dudes. It's that sort of kind of horror stuff anyway.
So essentially, yeah, he's sort of he went a bit nuts with everything that he could throw at the wall on this one. He, we mentioned it when we were talking to Andrew Wildman, that essentially Volume 4 was close to his original pitch for Volume 3, but it was just too out there and too weird. So once he'd sort of earned his spurs with Series 3, he repitched the crazy wackiness of Cobra La and co, and actually got it through this time.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
Okay, cover A is drawn by Tim Seeley and Jeremy Freeman, and colored by Jean-Francois Beaulieu. It's Optimus Prime battling a bunch of Royal Guard from Cobra La. There is no background except sort of nebulous gray smoke, so we're not sure where this happens. Tim Seeley has a nice take on Optimus Prime. I don't think we've seen him draw Prime much before or ever. Okay, remind me, because I keep forgetting, Mark.
He drew Series 2, but most of the Transformer bits were handled by another artist. So he was he was kind of drawing the G.I.JOEs and the layouts, with another artist sort of handling the detail of the Transformers.
I like this cover. As an Optimus Prime fan, I feel like there's something a little odd going on where the grill of Optimus Prime's stomach meets the sort of chest plate with the two windshields, where the way that they're sticking out in a triangular fashion, and they've got that sort of lower edge, and then you have that white stripe, the silver stripe. Something about that is to me off model, but it's a good drawing, and it's a fun scene that doesn't really happen in the comic. I do think in terms of selling this series, most of these covers don't properly sell this series, I think, which might be sort of symbolic of the challenge of this series, which is that you have all these different factions, and a cover might work best if it's just one character, like Spider-Man swinging, or Superman flying, but if you've got 10 G.I. Joe characters on a vehicle, or you've got 5 G.I. Joe characters and 7 Cobra Law characters and some monster pretenders and Optimus Prime, and it starts to get busy. So these covers are going to have to sort of represent different factions of characters or stories, and it's almost like you need to complete them all. You need to get them all to get the whole sort of sense of the covers. Cover B is penciled by Tim Seeley and inked by Robert Atkins and colored by Rob Ruffalo. Rob Ruffalo was at Dreamwave, I believe, at the time, and I think he started coloring and then was also drawing, but I did not do my research to fact check that before this sentence came out of my face. This is Unicron's head in the background, and actually his head and shoulders, so he's in effect sort of leaning forward, and in the foreground are Globulus and Pythona and Nemesis Enforcer, and they might be in Unicron's hand. You don't actually see any fingers, but you also can't quite tell what they're sitting on. There is some sort of angular things over on the left side above the Devil's Due logo. This is a fun cover because this is definitely the sort of, that's like the moviest version. It's the movie villain from one movie and it's the movie villains from the other movie. It's the sort of most crazy and sci-fi either brand got, the planet, and also the 40,000-year-old Snake Man.
Mm-hmm.
This cover doesn't technically work because Unicron is not the size of a car dealership, and he's not the size of an aircraft carrier, and he's not the size of a capital city or a state or a continent. He's the size of a planet. So, a person in front of Unicron, it's like the entire cover would just be the green of his eye, and you could put like 1,000 comic book covers left and right and up and down, and it would still just be his eye. So in terms of scale, this is very much fudging it, but that's okay. Yeah. It's just a cover.
Maybe if they used color to push him a bit further into the distance, he could be further away rather than looking like he was just smaller.
Yeah, you draw him a little, it's detailed, or you apply a filter so he's out of focus. Cover C, which the internet tells me is an incentive cover, but I actually don't remember either way. Cover C is drawn by Tim Seeley and Clayton Brown and colored by Jean-Francois Bilieu. And this is Pythona's hand dragging across the Autobot sigil, which is either on a wall somewhere or someone's arm or chest. The wall or arm or chest is gray. And as happens at the beginning of the animated Joe movie, acid is coming out of Pythona's fingernails, useful chopping through chain link fences. So here she's sort of scratching across this Autobot logo, and little steams of smoke are coming out of it. This is a cool image. This to me is not a cover. This is a back cover ad for next month, or an inside back cover tease, or a final page epilogue at the end of like third crossover. And it's technically a cover because it's got the logo G.I. Joe versus Transformers, Black Horizon, all the way on the bottom. And this image does sort of jump off the stands because it's this sort of iconic thing and a hand, but it's not a fun cover. It's not a sexy cover. It's not a thrilling cover. It's just sort of an interesting puzzle. Okay, and then issue 2. Cover A is Tim Seeley, Jeremy Freeman, and Stefan Peru. And this is, I should say, cover A and B for issue 2, they don't technically connect, but they kind of almost connect. You can put them next to each other, and they feel like they were drawn next to each other together at the same time. I certainly think what happened here was Seeley did a layout for both, or Wildman did a layout for both, and then the other drew the other cover. So this one is Bludgeon, who is the Bludgeon is a transformer. He's a robot who transforms into a tank, but he hides inside a shell, a pretender's shell of not a samurai, but a skeleton samurai, which is one of the weirder and cooler Transformers things. Anyway, so it's snowing. Globulus's head and shoulders are looming in the background. There are some Cobra Law airships in the sky. Bludgeon is sort of leaning forward with his weapon drawn. He's standing in the snow at the ready, and behind him are three monster pretenders, the monster pretenders. And then you could put that on the left, and then next to it you could put cover 2B, which is by Andrew Wildman and Stefan Peru. And this is sort of the mirror image where similar stance, Prime, similar layout now to G.I. Joe airships, similar composition, head and shoulders of Hawk. His eyes are glowing. And then in the background are Firewall and is it Rewind or Eject? And Flint. And of all of the covers, this is my favorite because I'm an Andrew Wildman fan from way before I ever knew who Tim Seeley was. And I feel like Andrew Wildman, finger quotes, deserves to do the covers for this story because he drew the whole thing. Now, maybe there was some deadline thing, or maybe Tim Seeley said, oh man, I really wanted to draw this too, but I could only write it. Well, let me do some covers. And I also think in terms of sort of characters that you recognize that also represent sort of what the story is, I feel like cover 2B by Wildman best represents these two double-sized issues, right? I see a Transformer, I see a Joe. There's something weird about it because the Joe, a human, his eyes are glowing. And if you could take all the covers and sort of mush them into one or two covers, it's like, okay, just throw Globulus onto this, or just throw Unicron in the background, and this becomes the like fully representative cover for this miniseries.
Or just or a double cover, a front and a back.
Yes, a wraparound.
Yeah.
Yes.
And hey, on the Bludgeon cover in the background, they've got those sort of Cobra La airship things that Pythona took into space in the pages of the Energon Universe special.
Oh, right.
It's just nice to see those again. There we go.
You know what? I bet we could count on our hand the number of times that a G.I. Joe or Transformers cover has been a winter scene where it is snowing. And G.I. Joe vs. Transformers #2, A and B, both. It's not just a winter scene. It's not just, let's say, the Himalayas. There is snow. Now, the snow is an effect that I believe the color artist applied. I don't think this is in the original pencils or inks. We certainly have winter covers for both series, for both brands, but I think almost never falling snow.
Plot breakdown.
In Tibet, 1978, Joe Colton of the Adventure Team is captured by Cobra La. 25 years later, in present day, Hawk has changed since being exposed to the Matrix. He has resigned from the G.I. Joe team and is working with the Autobots to stop Destro from selling Cybertronian technology. Hawk receives a weird message indicating the coming of Galactus. He joins Optimus Prime on a mission to the Himalayan mountains, where they battle Bludgeon and Cobra La and reunite with Joe Colton. They discover that many millennia ago, the leaders of Cobra La used the threat of using metal-eating spores to strike a deal with Unicron to sacrifice humanity and turn the world over to Cobra La. If that sounds a little bit convoluted, it probably is. The Autobot Cosmos and Flint are sent with metal-eating spores from Cobra La to infiltrate Unicron's body and destroy him from the inside. And they save the world. The end. I had to condense it a little bit. It's 2 double-sized issues. It originally intended to be published as 4 separate issues, condensed into essentially 2 48-page issues or whatever it was. Instead, it's a dense old read.
So my top-down take on this is my favorite of the Devil's Due Transformers G.I. Joe crossovers, because Andrew Wildman draws it, and I'm a big Andrew Wildman fan, and I feel like he's the guy who you get to do this, not just G.I. Joe and Transformers, but also Unicron stuff, because he drew the coming of Unicron in, US Transformers 73 and 74, and
Right.
he didn't draw issue 75, but that's okay because the person who did was great. And I also like this because Seeley puts everything in, and it's all fun and it all works. It's too crowded, and it really wants another issue or two. There are dozens of moments where a character shows up briefly, and if you are a fan, you know who it is, and you know the significance of, okay, that character who doesn't ever show up gets to do something in the story. Neat. Or, oh, that character has sort of a thematic connection to this moment because, this is about monsters. Oh, well, it's about the monsters in G.I. Joe. Well, let's have the monster pretenders from Transformers show up because that's fun. Then there's sort of a mirror image thing going on. But for all of that, so as much as I also really like double-sized comics, and it doesn't matter if a comic book was intended to be 2 separate comic books and then was published as one, or if from the get-go the editor said we're making a double-sized issue. I just like comic books that are longer than normal. But all that said, I feel like if you hadn't read G.I. Joe or Transformers before this, if you hadn't read some of these crossovers before this, you might be able to follow the story because the characters explain it. We got to stop the spores. What's wrong with Hawk? He's got these visions. But the sort of the effect of it, the cool factor, the wow factor would just sort of like bounce off of you. Like, okay, I guess they saved the day, because there are so many moments where a character shows up or says a thing or does a thing, and I really want another panel afterwards where they can sort of take a breath, or before someone shows up or does something, they can sort of be in a panel before they do the thing so that you, the reader, can see that they're there, and then it's not a weird surprise when all of a sudden they're there. My sort of big example, before I get to my example, Mark, what's your take on this?
I enjoyed it, and surprisingly so. I think when this came out, I didn't even bother to read it, to be honest. So I 20 years on, whatever, memory a little bit blurred, but I think I hadn't been mad keen on the previous sort of G.I. Joe Transformers, not massively keen on crossing the streams generally, less invested in all of the Transformers lore of the thing. So and I sort of associate, you associate Andrew Wildman with sort of, great things happening in Transformers. And I kind of associate, him as with the comic, the G.I. Joe comic from Marvel, sort of taking a turn from the more grounded kind of, 80s G.I. Joe into the slightly more neon, wacky world of G.I. Joe featuring Snake Eyes and Transformers and the rest of it. So while Wildman is very capable here, I sort of that era of his is not necessarily quite as fondly remembered for me for the Joes. I'm not sort of casting aspersions directly at Andrew Wildman, but it's that confluence of that. I think that Marvel looking for that sort of 90s image style with the over rendering, which was I think more in Baskerville's inks than necessarily Wildman's pencils. The more exaggeration, and then you've got the sort of transition into the kind of the 90s neon version of G.I. Joe. I'm getting onto a different track here. This isn't that. So I went into it not necessarily having strong memories of it from the time, and expecting to be disappointed. And I was surprised that actually how much I enjoyed it. It's really dense, particularly towards the back end of it. And I think you sort of hinted at a couple of things where you really have to be paying attention to what's going on. But it's really deftly handled, the amount of characters and they're introducing, the things that they're doing. It flows really well, and it is really clear, and is a fun story. So sort of preparing for this, and sort of dealing with a short-term memory, I have read the series probably 4 times in the last few months, sort of running up to this, to sort of prepare myself and then prepare myself ahead of the recording. And there is so much there that I feel like I have to kind of go back and read it almost immediately before we record, so that it's fresh in my mind, because of the amount of stuff that happens in the course of just 2 issues.
I think part of what enamors me of this story is that I can see Tim Seeley both writing this as a fan, and this is me sort of forgetting, what he said when we interviewed him, his explanation. I can just see in this, like, you have to be a particular kind of G.I. Joe fan to include the lunar tricks, Carcass, Lobotomax, and the other one.
Yeah, lunar ticks. It's
lunar ticks.
Yeah, like lunar,
like the moon.
Yeah, and then ticks.
Okay, Tix, not Tix. So this actually would have been the last page of issue 1 had this been 4 regular-sized issues, and they get dialogue across 3 panels, which is basically the whole page, but you only see them for 1 panel. And this is both Tim Seeley saying, hey, this would be fun. Who are some aliens? What is an alien civilization or alien race that I could sacrifice so that Unicron can eat something on its way to Earth or Cybertron, right? Because all Transformers stories that involve Unicron have Unicron on his way to Earth or Cybertron. And to show the threat, you have him eat, in the case of the animated movie, Lithone, a planet, beforehand. Oh, and then Moonbase 1 and Moonbase 2. And this is not a story that demanded the G.I. Joe aliens from 1994, because the Joes in the story don't get into, they don't grab a payload and countdown and attack some Astro Vipers and say, we need to go up to the Joe, space station. That is not in this story. And so I say this nicely and plainly. There is no reason why you need these 3 aliens. Predacon, thank you. That's the other one's name. You don't need these 3 guys in this story, but it's a fun extra, and they finally get an appearance in the comic, and they never did before this, and I think never did it after. And I'm always ready to be wrong that there's some like fan club comic or convention exclusive comic or like action figure 2-pack that comes with a Larry Hama comic from 2014 when people weren't paying attention to those, that actually does have. But okay, so that's fun.
Although Energon Universe, we're out in space now, so you never know. We might see them eventually.
Yes, I do think we will sooner or later. So that's really fun. And Tim Seeley manages to incorporate a lot of different, like even on the opposing page, which would have been the first page of issue 2, had this been 4 regular sized issues, you have this conversation between Pythona and Destro, which she gets to be, delicious and evil, and he gets to be, unempowered and
on the back foot a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot shake the feeling that I have just sold out the human race. I trust you found your payment adequate? Very. In fact, I found it suspiciously high for the job. Destro gets to do a Destro thing. He gets to make a deal. He gets to be involved in sort of secret, behind the shadows world affairs. And having these 2 characters have a brief conversation is something that doesn't happen in the animated G.I. Joe movie. But if you think of these 2 characters, that would have been cool. Like if those scenes with Pythona in the animated movie could have been longer, either infiltrating the Terradrome or at Cobra Law, Destro doesn't get to do a lot in the movie because they don't have an action figure to sell anymore. So he's there sort of because the story demands it, not because sort of the marketing. So you have all these interesting matchups. And in that regard, this reminds me a little bit about what the 2 screenwriters of Avengers Infinity War and Endgame did in writing those two movies, where they get to have characters from across the Marvel Cinematic Universe who hadn't spent a lot of time with each other, spend a lot of time with each other. So you have a scene in one of these Avengers movies where a spaceship goes into space, and on it are Captain America and Rocket Raccoon and a couple other characters, right? If I'm remembering Endgame correctly. And those two characters haven't talked before. You know, Cap's been in 5 movies up until this point, or 6, and Rocket's been in 3 movies up until this point, or 7, or 4. And so you have these, you know, you have this bit where, is it eject or rewind? I'm sorry. As a Transformers fan, I really should know these two guys. I really should be able to tell them apart. But, you know, you have Blaster's Cassette, who's really into Earth culture and American television, and he and Firewall, and they get a couple moments, and then, you know, Prowl walks up. Hi, Firewall. What's he making you watch now? Hockey, football, soccer? That's fun. And yet, on sort of every page is a representation of how this double-sized 2-issue miniseries works and is fun, but also doesn't work and is, I don't want to say impenetrable, but challenging. Because 2 panels before that, you have someone somewhere saying, excellent. And you know it's a Decepticon because the word balloon has a purple outline. And his eyes are glowing, which, except for Hawk, is sort of a villain thing, right? I just want to go back for a second. Destro's eyes glow in this miniseries. I don't know why. I'm going to chalk that up to color artists making the wrong choice, which doesn't make sense. Is not explained, doesn't help the story. So this, the page that we're looking at right now, so this is page 22, 23, 24, I think 25 of issue 1. There's a sailboat, the weird Cobra Law floating like caterpillar floats by it. The Cobra Law citizen pilot says, the Nairath led us to these coordinates. Your shell should make you invisible to their security systems. He's sort of looking over his shoulder, so I think maybe he's talking to someone behind him. But there's also this very modern thing in the comics where someone's just talking. They're talking into like a receiver in their ear, and someone on the mission halfway around the world can hear them, or back at headquarters. So somewhere, this sort of orange and blue guy with glowing eyes in the shadow, a Decepticon, because of his word balloon, says, excellent. And I don't know where he is. I don't know if he's in that floating Cobra Law cocoon. I don't know if he's right behind that bald Cobra Law citizen pilot with the red shirt. I don't know if he's underground or underwater. And so 2 pages later, when some creatures attack the Autobots in the Ark underwater, and one of them says, it's been a long time, Autobots. And one says, we hope you like our new wardrobe. I think, cool. Who are these guys? And I'm a big Transformers fan. Now, like every Transformers fan who's not a 41-year-long Transformers fan who knows every era and has all the toys. You know, I have some eras where I dip in and dip out, and these are pretenders, or they're monster pretenders, or they're ultra pretenders, or they're mega pretenders from, I don't know, 88, 89, or 90. And I think these are the guys who merge into Monstructor later in the story, but pretenders are always hard because you have a shell and then you have a guy inside the shell who transforms into something, and sometimes they both transform to another thing. It's not like Optimus Prime is a red guy who transforms into a red vehicle. And so I see this page and I think, cool, but it's not like Starscream and Megatron doing the attacking. So there's this sort of immediate cool factor. There's this immediate recognition that's missing, that's lacking. And also Wildman's background is the literal background, the actual room or hallway they're in. I can't really tell where they are. Based on the previous panel, based on the previous 2 panels, right? Skids rushes in and says, we're under attack. And then he gets swatted by a monster walrus claw thing. And then I see him on the ground unconscious and the owner of the monster walrus claw thing. So I think, okay, these 5 villains have entered that room that those 4 Autobots and the 1 human are in. But like, did they crash through the wall? Did they come through that same doorway that Skid just came in? And this is where, as much as I love Andrew Wildman's drawing and storytelling and faces and textures, I do think that in not just this story, but in some of his comics, some of his backgrounds could be more clearly defined and delineated. And it's not just his backgrounds. Wildman, in this very story, every time he draws a close-up of a face, right, whether it's a human or a robot, there's just a little extra oomph to the solidity and dimensionality of those cheekbones and the planes of, if you go back to that previous page, Mark, Prowl's face on the top right, like, that's a good looking Prowl. This guy knows how to draw faces. He knows how to draw robot faces. And Andrew Wildman's thing was always that he drew sort of robots that didn't look quite mechanical. His Transformers all had cheekbones. Like, their faces looked kind of like people. And when Wildman pulls his camera back and you see a bunch of characters in a room and the characters are very small in a panel, he tends to let some of the details and a little of the finish, a little of the polish of, like, people's legs or like the rest of the room or very small props that people are interacting with. He tends to not draw those as detailed or as carefully. And I guess sort of the example that I was going to go to is, like, several pages earlier. This page is like, it's around page 10, when Destro's making the deal in Cuba and they get attacked, and Destro grabs this guy, Mr. Calendaro, and then he has his snakes attack. Okay, so there's this panel where Destro's dragging this guy along the top of a wall, and we're looking up, and Destro says, "Move! What good is a human shield that can't keep up?" And Wildman doesn't draw anything for these two guys' heads, and that's okay. Like, when you draw people far away, sometimes you don't put in any detail. But go one page further. There's this top panel with a bunch of annihilators and targets flying in, and Wildman has drawn the minimum so that I know sort of the, like, divisions of costume. This part of the costume is orange. This part of the costume is purple. This part of the costume is blue or red or gray. But it looks a little like a rush job. It looks a little like he's most interested in the storytelling, in the layout, and in the general anatomy, and in, like, faces and hands. And then he lets some of the smaller bits sort of, there's that annihilator all the way on the right. And I have found in some comics that Wildman has drawn, there's a good consistency all the way through. And in other comics that Wildman has drawn, like, a panel with one character or a close-up, I see him putting a little more polish and finish into the drawing. And this is not me wanting detail for detail's sake, like Todd McFarlane drew all the little bits on the webbing in Spider-Man. It's not that. It's like, I feel like in some of Wildman's panels in his G.I.JOE and Transformers work, I feel like some panels are like 85% finished. And since this story, Black Horizon, has so many characters and locations, I feel like it really wants every panel to be at that 100% level of sort of detail and polish, so that there's never any question.
Mm. And as someone who's not a Transformers fan, I sort of often let some of the Transformers-y elements wash over me somewhat without worrying too much about the detail. And that group of Transformers that you were talking about before,
who attack in the Ark underwater.
Yeah, who are presumably in the sort of the Cobra La flying caterpillar attack the Ark underwater. They're later on in the Himalayas, and I can tell from the colours as that we sort of see over their shoulders as they're looking at the G.I.JOE team, that those are the same colours exactly the same colours of the team that were in that earlier sequence. And then, as you say, they sort of have got little robot men inside those monster outfits on the outside, and they join up to a giant robot in that next sequence, Monstructor.
So this is in. Are you in issue? You're in issue.
I'm in issue 2 now, in the middle of issue 2.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so this page, right? If you go back a page,
Mm-hmm.
you see a bunch of Joe vehicles. You see a snowcat, 2 snowcats, 2 what's that actual thing called?
Havocs and Battle Bears.
No, Battle Bears. Okay, 2 Havoc, a couple Havocs, snowcats, Battle Bears, and then there's a POV over the shoulder shot from the point of view of these 4 or 5 Decepticon monster pretenders. And then one of them says, maybe we should do this as you know who. And the other one says, works for me. And he's starting to split open. And then you turn the page and they have already formed.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that's very important for me as a Transformers fan. When I was a kid and I watched the Transformers cartoon, that first season in 1984, I got a thrill every time a Transformer transformed. Because the animation sped up, which is to say they went from animating on 3s to animating on 1s. And there's this like magic trick happened in front of you. And it had the coolest sound effect in the world. And it was the brand sort of like strutting its stuff. It's like, this is what we do, right? Your toys are 2 toys in 1. And what takes you 20 seconds or, a minute, because you're a kid and your fingers don't have as much dexterity, or this Transformer is really complicated. It just happened in a moment in the comic. And the end credits of the Transformers cartoon is just shots of Transformers transforming, right? And so I have this sort of personal rule, which is that in every Transformers comic, a Transformer should transform. And that doesn't always happen.
Mm-hmm.
And some writers, I think quite reasonably, just treat the Transformers not as robots, but as people, as characters, and get into, motivations and betrayal and revenge and political stuff and really wonderful storytelling. And sometimes forget, these 2 characters who are arguing and that other character that's going to betray them, one of them becomes a plane. And maybe that plane guy should fly somewhere, right? Or, they've just been attacked. Well, it's faster for them to drive. They should all transform into car mode and just drive the 50 feet to cover so they don't get shot. Okay, so all that said, I think in this Transformers scene, it is fair to have a reaction shot on Snowjob say, watch out, dead ahead. And then his vehicle bumps into the foot of Monstructor. And, you could spend 6 pages, you could spend a full page of just panels of a Transformer transforming, or 5 Transformers transforming into one big guy. I think there needs to be like 2 small panels on this page before and after Snowjob's reaction, where you see these monster pretenders like starting to fold and connect. Because if you don't have that, it's like, who is this big guy and where did he come from? And so this is yet another example. And again, I really do like these 2 issues where I read this and I go, okay, I know what's going on and I love it. But I think a lot of people, it's like, I think people who don't read Transformers comics because this is what they think all Transformers comics is. God, they're just changing and I can't follow it. There's too many characters.
And as that sort of sequence sort of continues later on in that same issue, there's a moment where a character, and I think it is the
it's Windmill
in one of his rare appearances, it sort of gets sucked out,
flying the Sky Storm. Okay, so if you're following along, folks, this is issue 2, page 32, and Monstructor is shooting these Joe vehicles in the snow. All right, so back to you, Mark.
And yeah, he is sort of looking like the life is being sucked out of him. I'm trying to think of like a cartoon or a film where that happens.
It's like in a movie where someone goes to Egypt and like a mummy touches them.
Yeah, and then they sort of
they dry up.
Yes, exactly. And I missed this on the first couple of readings, but I'm assuming that this is a power of Monstructor, that they can sort of draw out someone's life force and age them or some such. Yeah, I guess it's not too important. We can see that this thing is happening to poor Windmill, even if we don't exactly understand the mechanics of why. And yeah, he's shouting in the next page, "Yes, ha ha ha! Give Monstructor your life force, humans." So yeah, well, you know, making sense what's happening visually versus what he's saying. And then yeah, he gets a hot head, and boom, it blows up, sort of leaving him for nothing.
I think you have to go back a page, Mark, because in terms of establishing and reestablishing. Okay, so on page 32, the Sky Storm, which is that G.I. Joe vehicle that is both a plane and a helicopter. And there was this year where like every Joe vehicle driver and pilot came in the worst colors possible, like green and orange and red. And Windmill is one of them. I've also never had this figure or this vehicle, so I'm speaking out of jealousy of all the kids who did. So the vehicle flies in, and it's a little hard to tell what it is because Wildman draws a really cool circle with a squiggly line to show a helicopter rotor blade in action. And I like that because I have pointed out on this podcast before an art pet peeve of mine when someone draws a helicopter in flight and draws the rotor blades frozen as if you took a picture, as if like the helicopter stopped moving in space for a moment. But no, we can't. It's a blur. Yep. Okay, so then in the second panel, the Sky Storm is approaching Monstructor, and we effectively do not see its pilot Windmill in either of those first two panels. There's a tiny squiggle of ink in the second panel, so you can sort of see him in the cockpit, but effectively you cannot see him. And by the time you see his first appearance in this entire miniseries, there's a color effect where he's already glowing and his skin has turned to like desiccated
mummified.
And
yeah.
he's saying, "I'm going to swing by and see if I okay." And I got to this page and I thought, who is that?
Yeah.
And I am a G.I. Joe. Okay, I did not have this toy and I wanted it. You know, it's one of those things where if my brother and I had gotten one more vehicle that year, if we'd had a little bit more money, if the toys from that year had stuck around a little longer the next year, we would have gotten it. So I know who this is, and I want every obscure Joe to show up. But what this page really needs is one more panel where we see Windmill before he gets mummified doing some of this dialogue, and then he's starting to get mummified. And then in the next panel that we do see, the Sky Storm is veering downward. And I think that's because its pilot is sort of dead now. And so it's kind of crashing. And I like that more than one thing is happening on this panel, right? Monstructor is saying, ha, 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 and reaching for the, it's a little hard to tell.
A snowcat, isn't it?
Snowcat. So he's grabbing the snowcat. And then in the next panel, it's like the same point of view. So it's like A-B. It's the moment before and the moment after. He has, I think, he's backhandedly thrown the snowcat into the crashing Sky Storm so that they both blow up before the Sky Storm actually hits the ground. So that's complex. And I think Wildman is given a nearly impossible task on this page. And if he had divided it into not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panels, but 6, it's like maybe that third panel could be half as big. And there could be 2 panels there. It's like a before and an after of Windmill where he's not mummified and then he is mummified. Kind of the same drawing, kind of the same point of view. So I'm gonna lay this at the feet of Tim Seeley because I think Wildman is doing the best he can with a dense and unforgiving script. And again, this is on top of like drawing a robot who's made up of 5 other robots, drawing a really weird G.I. Joe vehicle. Oh, wait a second, drawing 4 really weird G.I. Joe vehicles all on one page. And also this is like a fight with choreography. It's like, well, they're on the left and he's on the right and he swings around and he's over him and he crashes and he grabs it and throws it and they hit. So, so I love it, but wow.
And then
then sorry, one more thing. Then you get to this narrative, I'm gonna say problem of, I want obscure characters to show up. If they're just gonna show up for one page and die, I'm not sure I want them to show up. And I do want this story to have stakes, and a way to do that is that characters don't make it out alive. And I really thought the Joe hero at the end of the story and the Autobot underdog hero at the end of the story, who go on a actual impossible mission in the final few pages of this miniseries, I thought they weren't going to make it out. We can talk about that in a minute. But, you know, if it's like Duke or Snake Eyes, people might be upset. And so, well, maybe you pick Windmill because, well, Windmill isn't anyone's favorite character. But if we've never really seen Windmill in G.I. Joe comics or in this miniseries or in previous G.I. Joe Transformers Devil's Due crossovers, does it lack weight?
And if you don't even realize it is Windmill, even more so.
Right. Because the only way that you know that it's, because there's no, sorry, I have to say one more thing. Wildman draws the Sky Storm, this funny vehicle. He draws it 3 times, but he never gets to draw it sort of big and full and obvious. There's no like presentational drawing of it. It's like the smallest thing on one panel and the smallest thing on another panel and heavily cropped on another panel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this, you know, this happened in issue 1. This sort of same thing where like when Mindbender shows up in issue 1 on page 20, his first appearance in this miniseries, he's drawn very, very small and not very detailed. Mm-hmm. And I had to squint and lean in and say, "Oh, that's Mindbender." Okay.
Right.
But he's important to the story, and this kind of Mindbender and Windmill thing is all over these 2 issues. So I would say these 2 comics are for advanced G.I. Joe and Transformers readers. They are not for beginner readers.
And as an example, you were talking about Windmill appearing on one panel and dying on the same panel. We've got the Laser Squad celebrating blowing up the head of the Monstro, who in theory I guess is 5 or so Transformers. So it's just one of those that has actually come a cropper, and the others are sort of just feeling feeling the impact of having one part of them blow up while they're all combined. And it is the laser squad of Sci-Fi, Flash, and Tim.
Is this? I don't know.
It is Red Spot, who was released in 2003. So part of that. I think we were still in the G.I. Joe versus Cobra era at that point.
So he came in a 2-pack with who?
With Cobra Coils.
Okay. So the fan in me loves that Sci-Fi gets to show up and specifically do his thing, right? Shooting lasers. And he's got a very special kind of laser here. You know, it's not just like his backpack
it's a
and
deluxe
his
one.
regular laser. It's like, oh, that's a power pack. That might be bigger than a backpack. And then we get to see Flash, and his costume's a little underdrawn, but okay. And you know, Flash is one of those characters we sort of don't see anymore ever. And then we see New Guy, and I assume for some toy collecting Joe fans around 2003, 2007, this is very cool. Hey, Red Spot, awesome. And okay, so on a second level, as a Joe fan, I see 3 specialists all doing a thing together as an impromptu team, which is what would happen. You know, like every year or 2, the Joes get a new Arctic guy, and there are surprisingly few G.I. Joe stories where most or all the Arctic guys go do an Arctic thing in the Arctic or the Antarctic. And so here are 3 laser guys doing a laser thing together and saving the day and getting to appear. So this is a really fun cameo. And as I put my index finger and thumb down to turn the page, I thought, I sure hope these guys get to do one more thing on the next page, like talk to Lady J and Duke, or like ski down the hill with like shovels and pickaxes and start like burying the 4.5 remaining monster pretenders, or like radioing. But I also bet that when I turn the page, the scene is going to change somewhere else and we will never see these 3 guys again.
Yeah, it is at times a little bit of a game of I Spy, and here's let's have another one. This is roundabout page 41, I think, of the second issue. So he appears in a couple of different panels. I'm talking about that sort of weird looking, sort of turquoisey guy who's in the top right hand corner of this particular page where they're rounding up Cobra La as we're sort of getting towards the end of the story, and Flint is coming back from his triumphant mission, and it's a bit of a case of, wait, who's that guy? Why is he there? And I think that's a sort of a case of Tim Seeley just going right into the back of the toy box, trying to find a weird looking guy that's never really been used before in the comics, and just giving him a teeny tiny moment.
But Tim Seeley is fan enough to make it make sense, because this is Bushido from Ninja Force. Yep. And he is a cold weather specialist. So if you're gonna throw a random Joe into this scene, like it could be Roadblock, or it could be Tollbooth, or it could be the Snow Ninja guy.
Wow. Yeah. On his packet, it says Bushido, Snow Ninja.
Yes, and on his file card, his primary specialty is cold weather specialist.
Cold weather ninjaing. Wow.
And I think he's in 2 panels of this.
Yeah, of this entire book.
Of this whole miniseries. Okay, so I say this in our interview with Andrew Wildman. Issue 1, I counted all the marquee characters, so I'm not counting like a newscaster on the TV or some random panel of like a mom and a kid in the suburbs reacting to a disaster. But in terms of Joe and Cobra characters who either get toys or are sort of established supporting characters, issue 1, and it is double-sized, issue 1 has 38 characters. And that is not a lot of room to do characterization or character development. And yet, as we have both said, this story does all make sense. The dialogue doesn't contort itself to sort of overly explain what's going on in a sort of dumb or distracting way, because it is all too busy. The dialogue is natural. This book does not rely on a narrator to, captions to explain what is going on. And, some of it is sort of normal speechifying. Galobulus says,
today the humans and their vile world will become nothing more than food to the great metal messiah Unicron.
I just felt like doing that line. And so this impossible juggling act, Seeley and Wildman pull it off. And oh man, have we read G.I. Joe stories from Devil's Due, where because the creative team or part of the creative team wasn't up to the challenge, or because there was some kind of editorial or publishing change and the story sort of wasn't what it could have been or got shorter. We have seen Devil's Due G.I. Joe stories with too many characters, too many locations, too much story, that like it suddenly gets truncated and it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. I'm confused by who's who, or I'm really dissatisfied at the end. And I am pretty satisfied at the end of this. And, again, I think sort of embedded in all this, I don't know if I've quite said it in words. I'm giving Seeley and Wildman a lot of leeway on this, because I'm so delighted that Wildman is back. That Devil's Due hires someone who'd done this stuff before. There were only a few times that Devil's Due hired Larry Hama to write G.I. Joe for them. And I really, at the time, wanted them to only hire Larry Hama to write G.I. Joe for them and no one else. And so it's just such a pleasure to see Wildman do this. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd always somehow wanted the sort of extremity of G.I. Joe the movie and the extremity of Transformers the movie to get mashed together. And you don't ever have that. You have Cobra Commander showing up sort of in one episode of Transformers after the movie, but there's no connection to the extreme craziness of either of those two animated movies.
I found the exact quote. I mentioned it in the interview, that that we had, where it was about, why did he come back, and he said he came back to this because he just had a gap in his work, and he'd done Transformers: The War Within for Dreamwave. That had finished when the company folded, and he thought, what else can I do? What can I revisit? What would be cool? And he thought that it'd be cool to do G.I. Joe again, because one of his worries was his son. Sort of seeing him draw, war things and stuff. He was nearly 20 at that point in time. So he said that he literally just sent an email to the Devil's Due office, and he didn't even know who that email was going to be seen by. And it's basically said, "Hi, my name's Andy Wildman. I used to draw G.I. Joe. Have you got anything for me?" And they just got in touch and they said, "Yeah, that's wicked. We've got a project that you could do." So it was just him asking, and that email arriving at exactly the right time. So handy. What else? You were talking about the number of characters you were talking about, Tim, but maybe this might not sort of have immediately struck you at the time, but sort of thinking about it, it's obvious. But in the previous series of this G.I. Joe versus Transformers continuity, most of the big Transformers Decepticons characters were sort of taken off the board, that they were destroyed in some form or another. So the likes of Megatron and Soundwave and Starscream and so on and so on. So the sort of the big Decepticons left over, and the ones that are used in Black Horizon are sort of more of the B-listers. It's like Bludgeon and some of those other surrounding characters. So while there's a lot of characters and a lot of Transformers characters, the Decepticons, in terms of that side of the big bad, sort of they're digging further down into the bottom of the toy box to find some cool but less obvious A-list Decepticons.
This is a good reminder. I just want to point out that Bludgeon is a B-list character. The Monster Pretenders are C-list characters. Andrew Wildman drew a lot of Bludgeon in the final 4 issues of Transformers back in 1990, 1991. So that's a fun return. It's not just he's the like crazy skeleton samurai guy. It's like, oh no, he's in charge for a couple of months back in 1990. This is also a good point that Transformers versus G.I. Joe Volume 3, written by Tim Seeley, and Volume 4 that we're talking about today are part of a larger story. It does help if you have read 3 before you read 4, and 3 is more fun if you then read 4, in a way that 2, with the time travel and being so scattered, I don't think it sort of strongly connects to the others. And Volume 1 is so sort of, earthbound and grounded. It's been a while since we talked about it. But 3 and 4, Seeley didn't write them at the same time, but it feels more like that.
Yeah, there's definitely more being carried across from 3 into 4 with the whole Hawk thing, particularly, and how that is set up. It feels like you need to have remembered a little bit more of where we are.
Also, we haven't said this, but it's worth calling out. Having Joe Colton show up in the story in the way he does is fun and novel, and hadn't really happened previously in G.I. Joe stories. Joe Colton, Larry Hama uses him in Marvel issue 86, and then he shows up again in, what is it? What's the cover with the battle copter in front of the Empire State Building? Is it like issue 127 or 128 by Andrew Wildman? And then Colton, he's in 152, which was for the anniversary, the G.I. Joe anniversary.
And let's not forget that in the pages of G.I. Joe America's Elite, which is running concurrent to this series, Joe Colton is the G.I. Joe leader there.
To not just say that this character from a previous version of the brand at Hasbro has a connection to this current Real American Hero version, but to have him on an adventure team mission, even though it's only, a page or 2. I don't think we had ever seen this in G.I. Joe comics. And Since then, we have seen this one or two times. We saw this in a big way in the IDW Revolution and Revolutionaries sort of cycle of, it was sort of 2 years worth of comics where they were making a real go of connecting these timelines. Rob Liefeld's Snake Eyes Dead Game has a moment like this where, we're in the snow and there's some Adventure Team guys. And I feel like Seeley gets some credit for doing it, lightly and elegantly and first, even though, of course, Hama had, brought in the character. I want to, and again, and the Abominable Snowman. So to have this sort of villain that runs through some of this story.
Yeah. So the I Spy, is the original G.I. Joe, Joe Colton, who it wasn't, I guess, called that at the time, sort of retroactively called Joe Colton, and then the Mike Powers, the Atomic Man, as part of his adventure team there in the beginning of issue 1.
If we can do the technical product name for Joe Colton in this scene, this would be the Land Adventurer, because he's got the beard.
Okay.
Please, because the Action Soldier becomes the Land Adventurer when they do Adventure Team. Okay.
And then they've got a definitive call out to the search for the abominable snowman. Here we go. With I guess Joe Colton, sort of beardo Joe Colton in that adventure, but specifically the abominable snowman, who in this set does seem to be on a slightly different scale to the actual G.I. Joe figure himself. He doesn't look quite as monstrous, but
doesn't this set a trend? Didn't we talk about a previous episode where whenever I see a German Shepherd in real life, I'm surprised by how big it is, because the action figure law that comes with the order toy is so small.
Yeah.
And then I start thinking about other dogs and wolves that come with Joe figures, and they must be bigger scaled in real life.
I spy with my little eye.
While we're talking I Spies and little Easter eggs, one of the coolest ones that I liked was these battle beasts, which were sort of inside Unicron.
This is page 20. This is page 26 of issue 2. And the idea is that Unicron is so big and complex that he has natural defense systems, the way that we humans have, enzymes or white blood cells to break down things. And in the animated movie, the way that Unicron actually has those like tentacles with little claws that attack RC. And is this a case where, Mark, it's sort of like Windmill? We see the battle beasts and they're not named.
Yep.
So this is an Easter egg. I don't think Tim Seeley said to Hasbro, hey, can we use battle beasts? Can we call them battle beasts? And this is a guess. He just had the script refer to battle beasts, and Wildman looked them up, or he sent him some reference, and then he drew them. But like Windmill's appearance, we only see the battle beasts in these.
And they appear in a couple of panels across the piece, but never explicitly called out.
What you'd sort of expect in this kind of crossover is more splash pages where you turn the page and you see like a cool badass moment, right? So like, I think of Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller's, 1986 Batman story. Once or twice per issue, there is a full page splash of a moment that just stops you in your tracks. Like Batman has finally taken on a new Robin, and they both launch themselves off a building into the night sky. Splash page. Or there's a splash page where, is it Bruce Wayne or Batman is like wrapped in the American flag and someone has just killed someone or killed themselves, right? And there's like TV news reporters, something, like a full page splash that makes you sort of stop. And I feel like this story, and this is what you'd get for 2 more issues worth of comics, like you turn the page and it's like Flint is in Cosmos, and they don't just see like the head and a shoulder of one battle beast from behind, and the hand of another battle beast, and a very small battle beast in far away from the camera from behind. But you see like a splash page of battle beasts, and Wildman gets to sort of show off and then like sell that original page for a lot of money to all the battle beasts fans. Also, what makes me think that Hasbro didn't quite say, yes, use the battle beasts, is that we don't see their chest logos.
Right.
Wood, fire beats wood. And no one rubs their chest to reveal their allegiance to have them do battle as battle beasts.
Yeah, here's the bit of the factoid about battle beasts. So they were created by Takara in Japan, 1986. And Tomy Co., aka Takara Tomy, owns the worldwide rights to the property. It was licensed to Hasbro for distribution outside of Japan, where they were marketed in America and the world. In the Japanese market, Takara branded the toys as a spin-off of Transformers, and even named the toys Beastformers. But their tie into the Transformers universe was not part of the Hasbro story or marketing.
Okay, so are we to assume from that by 2006, when Seeley's writing this, Hasbro does not have any rights to use or allow a comics publisher to use this brand?
Guess not. Yeah. So it's going to be a slight wink to it rather than an explicit, kind of.
I have done no research on battle beasts in my years of investigating G.I. Joe and also Transformers, but I'm pretty sure that it was aimed at a younger demographic, the way that Transformers was, whereas G.I. Joe was aimed a little older. You know, Transformers was like 6 to 8, and G.I. Joe was more like 8 to 12, roughly. And battle beasts, based on their price point, I think they came in 2-packs, and their articulation. And sort of the lack of story, I think this was aimed at a younger age group. In Humanoids too. In Humanoids was aimed at a slightly younger age group. Can we shift gears for a moment? Can I talk about color?
Yep.
We see devil's due colors distracting you. I see devil's due colors, light sources don't seem true, so Tim's not afraid to let them know. Devil's due colors are awful, like bad guano.
I don't love the color in this miniseries. There are a lot of pasty colors. Just, look at panel 1 of page 1 of the second issue, the very first page, where also I just want to point out, I know that sort of the logic of G.I. Joe has a character being in their costume wherever they are, like Gung Ho in the Arctic is not going to put on a coat because then you can't see his costume. But I do sort of feel like Firewall could be wearing a winter coat here. Anyway, on the one hand, based on the time of day and the altitude and the storm. Oh, here's it. Okay, Mark, I'm looking at my computer screen where you have just put that page up, and I'm also looking at my comic book. This is a scan of that page.
Yeah. So it's more saturated.
Yes, someone opened this up in Photoshop and added some saturation, or the original, digital file, if it got out, is more saturated. The paper copy I'm holding, there is less green in Cosmos's body. It's just more of a murky light gray. And the same thing with the yellow, and the same thing with, there's less red in Firewall's complexion. But in both cases, I find that the color in this story has too much white, it's too pasty, and too much black, too much K. There are lots of scenes where, the next page actually, where Firewall has now fallen through this hole in with snow, and then she lands, and then she sees the abominable snowman, and just the murky, Firewall's leg at the bottom, like all of that dark on the middle and underside of that leg, that's not Wildman using pencil or an ink wash. That's a color artist painting in Photoshop with green and then adding black. And the same thing with the snowman. That's not like a gray made darker with color. That's a gray made darker with black. And it's everywhere across these two issues, both pasty and muddy color. And it's not my favorite. There's also an interesting effect, which I think I like. A couple times someone punches or kicks someone, and the color artist, if you go 1, 2, 3, 4 pages further ahead in this second issue, Bludgeon kicks Prime in the face. And not Wildman, but the color artist sort of draws an effect where you have this sort of burst, this hard-edged, like triangular star burst. And I sort of like it. I don't think the actual shape quite matches how Wildman would have drawn it. And I think if you're the color artist and you're going to sort of, quote, draw in color, you need to be able to extrapolate how the artist would have drawn it. Otherwise, it looks like it sort of wandered in from a different style. But what's interesting here is that when he does this, when I think this is Wes Dzidba, not Art Lyon. I think I can sort of tell who's coloring what scenes. But interestingly, this starburst here is not just an effect; it's a light source. So Prime is illuminated by it, even though it's not a real thing. It's not a light bulb that's hanging in that scene. And Bludgeon's foot and his sort of left side are illuminated by it. And then Prime's left side and Bludgeon's right side are in shadow from it. And Wildman is sort of indicating that because he has a cast shadow below Hawk. Right? On the bottom. And I think sort of inventing this kind of lighting based on a punch or a kick or, like two swords hitting each other, that's fun. I think a colorist is running the risk of sort of being too loud and distracting, but I like it.
Cool. You touched on that opening sequence with Firewall.
This is issue 2.
Issue 2, yeah. And that was a sort of a thought that I had. That previously, when we were talking about the G.I. Joe versus Transformers series, I think particularly the last one, that I was saying how it was quite difficult to kind of like orientate myself to the kind of the continuity, because we sort of these issues sort of come sort of out relatively sporadically, and then you're reading the regular continuity as well, and you're trying to keep in mind maybe some of the differences between what's happened in one continuity versus the other, and it felt like for this series they're sort of even blurring the Devil's Due continuity even a little bit further by having the likes of Firewall, who is very much a Devil's Due continuity originated character, featuring very prominently in this series, and I don't think in the previous series, but I might be misremembering. And then there's an even stronger example, which is skipping right towards the very end of the series itself. There's another Easter egg, final page. You've got Joe Colton dressed up as Super Joe as he's about to go and skip space, but it's Hawk and
wait, and Easter egg. Do the other Easter egg in panel 1.
We've got a whole bunch of Space Joes. Which one do you want to
start? Well, it's just Star Brigade that we see Roadblock in his orange, and we see, I don't know if that's Space Shot. We see Sci-Fi, Sci-Fi, who in the previous issue is in his 86 costume, and here he's in his whatever it was 91. Okay, so back to Hawk and this lady
who he mentions in the opening his opening sequence in issue 1, Carol Lee as well. So it's this sort of lady love of his, and the only time we've ever seen that character before is in the Devil's Due continuity in issue 33, which is where Hawk has been shot, which leads to him being paralyzed, and sort of in his fever state, he thinks back to his lost love, Carol Lee. So yeah, a really sort of interesting kind of blurring of continuities there of you trying to remember who was that character. Oh, it was that one person mentioned in that one issue in this other continuity.
You know what I thought when I got to this final page? I thought I should know who Carolee is, but I don't. I hope Mark does. So I'm glad you did. Thank you. But I also thought, hey, neat, Star Brigade, and like very specific Star Brigade,
Yep.
and also Super Joe. So there's a lot of fan patting on the head going on this page. But the other thing that this final page makes me think of. So here is the final page of the last G.I. Joe Transformers crossover. At this point, Dreamwave is gone. Dreamwave had successfully published a 6-issue Transformers G.I. Joe miniseries written by John Nayriber and drawn by Seeley and colored by June Chung. It's set in World War II. It's so cool and so weird. And then Dreamwave tried to do a second crossover and only got 1 issue out, and then the company folded. Okay, so in terms of the sort of who's making G.I. Joe and Transformers comics in 2006 and 2007, Dreamwave's gone, and IDW is coming on the horizon, right? Mm-hmm. So this is and when a new publisher shows up to do one of these 2 licenses, your first question isn't, well, when are you going to have this license cross over with another license? It's like, no, we want to establish ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that Black Horizon as 2, even without Tim Seeley telling us that we just needed to wrap everything up because the movie was coming. Like at the time I thought, oh, there's got to be some reason to doing this as 2 double-sized issues. It sort of feels rushed. And so this is the end of a large cycle of G.I. Joe and Transformers crossovers that Devil's Due had just done 4 of them, and Dreamwave had done 1 and tried to do a second, and surely would have done a 3rd one if they could have. And what this scene reminds me of is the romance that happens in the 1986-1987 Marvel original G.I. Joe and the Transformers crossover, which is written by Michael Higgins and penciled by Herb Trimpe and is not very good. It's just really, really stiff. The whole thing is stiff. But in it, there's this subplot where Hawk has this love interest, and it is flat and unconvincing, and she dies. And I think the final page of the whole miniseries is he visits her grave. And so I think Tim Seeley, coincidentally, inadvertently, without meaning to, creates this really interesting sort of bookend for me, where in the very first G.I. Joe and Transformers crossover, which is disappointing in just about every way. Right? Like, I love Herb Trimpe's G.I. Joe art. I like Herb Trimpe's Transformers art. That miniseries was just not like a great thing for him. It's all just fine, right? I don't love the inking. I really don't like the writing. It's like not a really good Transformers story. It's not a really good G.I. Joe story. And it's not a really good G.I. Joe and Transformers story. And whenever I read it, I reread it every 10 years. And I think, am I misremembering this? And then I read it. No, I'm not misremembering. And so here, like jump ahead 20 years, 86, 96, 06. And you have, it's like, okay, Tim, we're going to put everything you could possibly want into a G.I. Joe and Transformers miniseries. Unicron, Cobra Law, some 70s guys, the space guys, the alien guys, some Devil's Due characters, right? Like Snake Eyes almost does nothing in this miniseries, but we're going to put him in there anyway. And I was never at all convinced by this love interest in that original miniseries, because that kind of subplot is not a part of Larry Hama's G.I. Joe. Yes, Flint and Lady J a little bit, Snake Eyes and Scarlet often, but not a lot, actually, right? This isn't like Scott and Jean in X-Men comics, right? Or various Avengers who have dated various other Avengers. And I feel like this ending scene, because Carol Lee isn't dead and didn't get sort of like pulled into the like human is sort of a transformer, his brain gets taken over, whatever, he sees the future, he goes to space, his eyes glow thing, right? I think in the case of the Marvel miniseries, I think Bombshell, the Insecticon, puts one of his hypnotizing microchips either on Hawk or on the love interest, I forget. And so like they sort of don't connect because one of them is hypnotized. And so this is not that same love interest because it's a different lady, but she lives. They get a happy ever after. And this final page also has 2 major Easter eggs on it for Joe fans. And so I feel like Tim Seeley is very lightly sort of rewriting the end of the 1986-87 miniseries for me. So thank you, Tim Seeley.
Yeah.
And the whole thing, this page is handsomely drawn by Wildman. And considering that I don't love the coloring in this miniseries, the colors on this page look good.
Yeah, very good observation. Parallel between that first crossover finishing with Hawk by the love interest that didn't work out and a gravestone, and this one of them, arm in arm, wandering into the sunset. Very good. Yeah, maybe could well be intentional.
Also, this final page, like there wasn't going to be a 5th crossover, but really lightly, Tim Seeley's, without like a final page, like from crossover 2 and crossover 3, Tim Seeley is not teasing, but he's allowing a 5th crossover on this final page because of the space guys going into space and Joe Colton saying, we're going to have ourselves one heck of an adventure, right? It's not specific. It's not like we have to go clean up the Unicron mess floating in... Actually, no, they do say that.
Yeah.
Flint says, Unicron's body is floating outside Earth's atmosphere.
Do you see that very final panel where it's the end and Carolee and Hawk are arm in arm wandering off into the literal sunset? Top right-hand corner of that panel, there's a sort of grey blob. That is Unicron's on his back floating through space.
Wow. Shame on me. I did not see that last week when I read this. I did not see that in 2007 when I read this.
So imagine there's a sight for you, sort of as a sunset, looking up into the sky. Oh yeah, there's that robot space god just orbiting the planet.
I want to talk about the ending, the actual not the coda, this final page, but the sort of the wrap up of the world is going to end scenario where Nemesis Enforcer is fighting Joe Colton, and I guess that we spent a lot of time with Monstructor and the Joes in the snow and Windmill. That was actually just a few pages before the end of the story. But the sort of the narrative end of the story is that Flint gets on board Cosmos. And I just going to interrupt myself for a moment. I just would just like to thank Tim Seeley because in issue 1, on page 16, Tim Seeley has someone, I think it's Destro, remark that Cosmos is a UFO. And I've always appreciated this sort of joke or inadvertent joke that Cosmos as an Autobot in 1985 in America is definitely not a robot in disguise, because he's not disguising himself as a car that you would walk right on by. He's disguising himself. He's an alien disguising himself as an alien. Okay. So
basing his disguise on something that he's seen in reality, which is definitely exists.
What was the slogan? Robots not in disguise. So so Flint gets on board Cosmos, and they have these metal-eating spores they've gotten from Cobra Law.
Yep.
And on page 35 of the second and final issue, there is a panel of Unicron reaching, and the color artists have kind of put a green glow in the palm of his hand. And I don't know what that is. No one says what it is. There's no narration. Unicron's not like, now I will suck the water from your Atlantic Ocean, or now I will shake Tokyo. But in the following panel, Tokyo is shaking, and I spent a lot of time on this earlier in the episode, but I feel like this is another good example of Seeley having not enough real estate to work with and giving Wildman a difficult task, which is, okay, you have one panel to show worldwide destruction because a planet-sized robot is standing in front of Earth, and there's going to be all kinds of gravitational problems. right? I know one of the Michael Bay movies did it, and I know the Ultimate Doom 3-parter Transformers that wraps up season 1 in 84 does it. But if you have a planet next to a planet, you have weather and and earthquake problems. And okay, as a contrast, everyone, if you want to see what a giant monster causing destruction across a large swath of Earth, including Asia, would look like if you give it a lot of time, read the final 5 issues of Firepower, which is a Skybound book that came out in the last year, where a dragon is like attacking across Asia, and the hero and heroes are trying to stop it. Artist Chris Samnee gets lots of real estate panels, pages, double pages to show like people and civilians and buildings and devastation. Okay, so Wildman, it's like the Cliff. This story ends up being like the Cliff's Notes version of a Unicron attack, of a Unicron defense. So this mission feels like it's a suicide mission for 2 reasons. One, Flint and Cosmos have this weapon which is definitely going to kill Cosmos.
Right.
Like, I feel like the story is hinting that the metal-eating spores that are carefully packed inside of Cosmos, like, well, we have to fly carefully. We can't bump into any walls when we're inside Unicron. Or if any battle beasts jump on the outside and try to like stab their way into you and kill us like a white blood cell would a bacterial infection in a human. I feel like the story is suggesting that Cosmos is not going to make it out of there, and therefore neither would Flint. So narratively, I feel like they shouldn't make it out alive.
Yeah, there's this panel where, as you say, let's not rupture while we're carrying them, and then Cosmos says, "Sigh, I guess if I'm going to die, being digested by fungus is at least original. Yes, Cosmos, you're weird. Let's save the death by fungus for Unicron."
Right, and then also, I feel like you can't have the least powerful Autobot and just a regular human. You can't have the least of us go into Unicron and come out alive every time there's a Unicron story. It happened in the animated movie in '86, but I feel like this time, like, Unicron is so big, surely they're going to get lost inside because they don't have a map. You know, like I go into Boston and I live next to Boston, and I step out of the subway and I like pull out my phone because I don't know where I am. Like, well, I know I was here like a year ago when I got coffee with my friend, but I think the park is over there. Where's the cafe I'm going? I don't know. And I live here. Now imagine if I took a UFO into Earth orbit, my first time in space, by the way, although maybe Flint, I can't remember if he was in space in the 3 previous crossovers. And like, they're not just flying around Boston or the Boston subway. They're flying around a planet-sized robot man, and they get to his brain pretty easily. And it happens in the course of, you flip back a few pages, and when they go inside his mouth, even that's pretty sort of not dramatic enough. Okay, so let me get back to this page that you have on screen right now. So it's the page where Tokyo is being destroyed, and then we see this brain. Okay, so something weird happens here, because in all of the previous panels where Flint and Cosmos are flying around inside Unicron, the walls are all dark gray. And then the one panel where they get to Unicron's brain, there's what sort of looks like buildings and what sort of looks like a sky, as if they're outside. And I think maybe the artistic intent here, or the coloring intent, or the script intent is like, there's so much activity in Unicron's brain. You know, there's like electrons or lightning or like TV screens, and there's a lot of light, that it's not like dark like his stomach or his, I don't know, inner elbow would be.
Yep.
But there's this weird thing that happens because 3 panels earlier, we see Tokyo getting shaken apart with like dark gray buildings and a light yellow sky.
Right.
And then we see this panel of inside this planet man, we see this very organic looking brain, which I'm sorry, I disagree with. He's a robot man. And this isn't Beast Machine. This isn't Beast Machines. We haven't started to say that the robots also had organic stuff in their past. They don't. But you have like these dark gray sort of building things with this light yellow, finger quotes, sky. And so narratively, I understand because Flint has a line of dialogue from the previous panel where he's definitely inside Cosmos, and it continues. We're almost ... there. But visually, this panel is really confusing for me because I thought, are they outside?
Nope, they're inside.
Nope. And then, you turn the page and like, I appreciate that Seeley has given, like Seeley has decided that Flint is going to get to shine in this miniseries, that he's going to get some character bits where, he can feel emasculated in front of Joe Colton, and he can be pleasantly surprised when Lady J kisses him because he saved the day after all. And he can be the hero, the reluctant hero, because he's going on what is definitely a suicide mission. And he can encourage Cosmos, who's not very confident. Like, okay, great. But this actual page near the end where Cosmos sort of gets shot inside Unicron and then lands, and then Flint says, oh crap, he's holding his head. Oh crap, it's up to me now, isn't it? And like a door is opening and Flint's going to come out of Cosmos. And one or two of these battle beasts is there, sort of a little dazed because they were just on a UFO that crash landed beside a giant robot man. And Flint has the bag and his shotgun. And he says, I'm here to save the world. Which one of you scumbags wants to try and stop me? Like, okay. All right, Tim Seeley. Now I feel like there's too much. He's not breaking the fourth wall. He's not talking to us, but in effect he is. And I feel like what would actually happen, because time is of the essence and you are definitely going to die, and these battle beasts are definitely there to attack you, and like they shouldn't give you 20 seconds to say something cool for not them, but me, the real person reading the story. I feel like they should just immediately attack him, and he should just immediately be running out of the cockpit, out of the landing ramp of Cosmos. Like, where do I throw these spores?
But instead, he can have a wisecrack as he does it. I hope you don't mind a side of mushrooms. Boom.
Yes, and then we get is that Carcass? So it was hanging on Cosmos 2 pages earlier was 2 battle beasts and one of the Lunar Tix aliens, who now gets 3 word balloons worth of dialogue. Mer, ha ha, human, you would seek to stop me. Oh no, sorry, he's speaking as Unicron.
Mer, ha ha, human, you would seek to stop me. I, Unicron, I will live longer than your very universe,
etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm getting all tingles from it's as if I'm speaking to Orson Welles.
And there's a little parallel storytelling where, Flint gets to be a hero and also Joe Colton gets to be a hero, as these 2 climaxes happen at the same time in different places. And then
he gets to go.
So the spores are spreading inside Unicron's head, and Unicron has a very small panel where he screams no. And again, it's very easy for me to just request that these 48 pages were actually like each 24 pages longer. But I feel like Unicron screaming in agony is a full page splash or a double page splash, right? And then Flint and Cosmos make their way out because I guess they have a map. It sort of reminds me of remember in Independence Day when they fly into the alien ship at the end and they open up their laptop, and for some reason their laptop connects to the alien ship so they can upload the virus. Yeah. But like, oh, does this alien ship accept like a 1997 like USB cord from a Mac, from an Apple laptop? Like, oh, good, they're compatible. So I guess Flint and Cosmos just retrace their steps in reverse.
Yep.
And then is there a joke here where is there like a curse that we're not supposed to see, where Flint says, oh, and I doubt he'll be playing piano anytime soon. And then Cosmos says, Flint? Cosmos says, yeah. Cosmos says, "You're weird." Is that like you're effing weird?
I don't know.
Like,
I don't know. Maybe
it's that like, why would there be a little bit of stat? I guess there's some static in Cosmos's word balloon at the beginning of this page, right? Systems rebooting, full power in 2.8 seconds. But I sort of read that as like, you're trying to make this edgy and have like a curse word where we don't need one, but we also can't have one. So that was a tiny bit distracting for me. Flint and Cosmos should have definitely died. I think the Joes and some Autobots should be sad at the end. I think Flint gets to go out heroically, and then Hawk gets the sort of happy sunset ending with his person. Here's one more example of Andrew Wildman, I think, not giving his all in the artwork in a way that would be easy. In issue 2, on page 3, he draws Outback, but doesn't write the word survival on Outback's shirt. And that's what makes Outback's costume, finished. And so I look at this drawing of a couple of Joes and I see Outback, and it's not really Outback if his shirt doesn't say anything. So Mark, we have really dug into these 2 issues. Were there any other large bits, character bits, or tiny, tiny small bits that you want to talk about?
I liked the way that there was a slightly slower build to the comic, and I don't need to make a big thing of it, but there's essentially like these 2 scenes of introducing, Joe Colton and him getting captured, which gives us 6 or so pages, and then there's another little scene of Hawk at home, sort of introducing us to him and his situation after the events of the previous miniseries, and he's about to be interviewed by a journalist, and he's sort of being talked bad of. Has he lost the plot a little bit? Has he got these weird sort of conspiracy theories, that kind of thing going on? And the journalist, he says that he needs to go, and the journalist essentially says to him, "Without this story, everyone will think you're a fraud, just another loser who uses crystals and believes in UFOs," as he is lifted off into the UFO by a sort of tractor beam. Let's reschedule for another time. Sure, another time. That takes us, those 2 scenes take us, is it about 13 pages ish into the story? So a good chunk of the real estate, given how how much they've crammed in the rest of it. So it's nice that we're kind of eased into it, and there's a bit of a sort of more focused couple of scenes that sort of introduce some of these key characters and concepts before everything goes too crazy.
I do think this is, again, a testament to how well Seeley balances all of these elements, that there are these character moments. I wonder if this was published as 4 issues, if we would I know we would probably you'd read 4 single-sized issues all at once before the podcast, or you'd read 2 double-sized issues right before the podcast. But I wonder if the pacing feels different for it being 2 double-sized issues. But, I've read a lot of crossovers. Some of them are 48 pages. Some of them are entire miniseries. Some of them are solo characters, and some of them are teams, and some of them get sequels and some of them don't. And again, if you know these characters to begin with and you have read the previous crossovers, this one really does work.
Quick observation, Tim, on this page of Joe Colton in the dungeon with all of the crossed out lines on the wall. Am I remembering correctly? Didn't you use this as a comparison on your blog when you're writing about Snake Eye's Dead Game, about how if you're going to have Joe Colton locked up in a dungeon, then maybe this is the way to do it rather than another way? Am I imagining that, or is that something that actually happened?
You are remembering correctly, and I thought since sooner or later we might actually do our Talking Joe review of Rob Liefeld's Snake Eye's Dead Game miniseries, I wouldn't spend a lot of time making this comparison, but in a sentence, Seeley and Wildman have this scene where you can see a background, and you are very aware of Joel Colton not just being a prisoner, but having been there for a long time and in a rough state. Whereas Rob Liefeld, with an assist by Chad Bowers, have a remarkably similar full-page splash as this in Snake Eyes Dead Game. But since Liefeld doesn't draw a lot of context, like backgrounds and sort of panel-to-panel continuity, the same story beat does not transmit. I guess that was one sentence, but a long sentence.
A long sentence. I did have a question. There's this sort of recognition between Hawk and Joe Colton, and Hawk has heard of Joe Colton, which makes sense if he's this legendary character that kind of inspired the name of G.I. Joe. But then there's also a moment where Joe Colton hears the name Hawk and sort of seems to have this sort of moment of recognition. He's captured in 1978. This story is set in the early 2000s. They reference 25 years that Joe Colton has been missing, so it's kind of almost in the present day, sort of as it's being published. But they never explain how it is that Joe Colton knew Hawk and knows his first name. I didn't want to linger on it too much because I guess the timeline is such that if maybe he was a youngish go-getter in his 20s and we're kind of 25-ish years on, I guess he'd be in his mid-40s as a sort of, the senior leader of G.I. Joe, kind of makes some sort of sense that it could happen, but it feels like a bit of a storytelling gap as to where Joe Colton would know Clayton Abernathy, aka Hawk, from.
That's a good point. I have an error detected or 3.
Error detected. Error detected. No prize incoming.
There, I don't know that I have a solution for these such that I would get a no prize. I'm just going to point out where something's missing. Issue 1, page 9, panel 4. The TV newscaster is talking, and there's a picture of Hawk over her shoulder in her second word balloon. She says, Abernathy, who resigned his post as commander of G.I. Joe over the government's handling of the situation, says the military is using technology-derived the Cobra robots used during... There's a missing word there. The missing word is by, B-Y, derived by the Cobra robots. Also, on issue 2, page 25, the one where the top panel is that Cobra Law creature tackling Prime, and Prime says, now. In panel 2, Joe Colton has a sword. In panel 3, he doesn't. In panel 4, he does. And lastly, this is not an error detected. This is actually sort of just a question on page 30 of this final issue. My note says, Royal Guard can talk? So I wanted to ask you about this. So Prime has now been tackled by a Cobra Law creature, and it's making a sound effect, glurg, which I'm just going to assume is it like dripping acid onto Prime's chest or something because it wants the Matrix or something. And Prime goes, ugh! And then our Royal Guard does not say, it says, all alone, robot, pathetic. You are not enough. You should have brought more machines for us to destroy. That's my impression of the Royal Guard. Mark, what do you think about Royal Guardsmen talking?
Yeah, I didn't really pick up on this one on the read through. It's an interesting one. I guess some people posit that they're slightly more creature-like, and other people maybe thought that thing that is what is on their head is more like a helmet, and that otherwise they would be similar to other sort of citizens of Cobra Law. I think probably before I started thinking about it too much and reading up on it, that was probably the camp that I would have been in, that I would have thought it was a helmet rather than a face. And I where am I misremembering? Is it Is it in Pages of Cobra Commander that they have their helmet smashed and there's a face underneath?
Wasn't someone grossed out recently by what they saw under a Royal Guard helmet in the Energon universe? Am I making that up?
Was it in here where it happened, or was it?
No. It's definitely in an Energon universe comic. Okay. So the Royal Guard's file card from 1987 says, "Bred and surgically enhanced for size, strength, and endurance, encased from head to foot in organic insectoid armor, tactically unimaginative, relatively useless without close supervision." And in the animated movie, they specifically don't talk. They all have that background. Now, there are some characters in the G.I. Joe animated movie. There are some background Joes who you see, because the storyboard artists included them, who do not have scripted lines of dialogue. And there are also a couple lines of dialogue in the G.I. Joe movie that are in the screenplay that were recorded that got cut for time and budget reasons. The movie was running long. It just needed to be shorter. And I don't have my Joe screenplay in front of me, so I can't say, oh, the Royal Guard had dialogue cut. But I've read that screenplay, and I'm pretty sure the Royal Guard did not have dialogue that's cut. I think they decided that Pythona would talk. She's interesting. Nemesis Enforcer is scary. He wouldn't talk. Globulus is interesting. He'll talk. And the Royal Guard don't need to. And I'm all for different continuities having a different take on the very wonderful and weird world of Cobra Law. But I feel like, the pilot is it the first issue of this miniseries, who's flying the caterpillar over the sailboat?
Right, yeah. He's more humanoid. Yeah,
he's got the strings attached to his fingers, which is a visual cue from the animated movie. That guy talks because he's a regular, citizen scientist, military guy in Cobra Law.
I found in the pages of issue 1, there is a sequence where Flint and co are set upon by Cobra Law. And they're having a fight, and at one point, Hawk says, "I don't know what you are or what Cobra Law means, but I bet you don't have bulletproof lenses." And then on the following page, Hawk grabs a Cobra Law and pulls off their helmet. "I bet you're not so tough without your hockey mask, are you, crab boy?" And then he says, and after he's pulled it off, he's shocked, and he says, "Oh, shave my head and call me Mary," indicating that he is, shocked by what is underneath that Cobra Law's helmet. So they're kind of indicating that these are helmets, but maybe what is underneath is weird or gross.
This is all right, and you're talking about Black Horizon. You're talking about the Tim Seeley, Andrew Wildman issue 1.
Yes.
I have one more error detected. It's near the end of issue 2. It is. Oh, it's on the final page of issue 2 that we talked about so much already. I have one more thing to say.
One more thing about that page. Crikey, what a page.
Okay. In the first panel with Hawk and Carol Lee, he says, "I'm glad you called me Clay." And what he's saying, she's saying, "I'm glad you called me Clay." And because there's no comma there, what she's saying is, "I'm glad you gave me the nickname of a muddy earth substance. I'm glad you called me Clay." She's not saying, "I'm glad you called me Clay," because there's no comma. And direct address, comma, Mark, requires a comma, right? "Dear listeners, comma, this is important to me." And in fact, in the next panel,
in the next word balloon,
Seeley and his editor gets it right, because Clay says, "Then why do you seem so nervous, comma, Carol Lee," right? And so the example I used to give my students is, "Give it to the king, baby." With the comma, it's "Give it to the king, baby." And without a comma, it's "Give this thing you have to that king of the babies over there. Give it to the king, baby." So just a pet peeve of mine. Direct address requires commas.
Very good. Here's another one. "Let's eat, Grandpa," or "Let's eat, Grandpa." The other thing that we not mentioned in our I Spy's the dates as well, which is just to actually call out the title, Black Horizon, being a reference to James Holton's novel Lost Horizon, which is about Shangri-La, which was the inspiration, Shangri-La, which is kind of lost civilization in the Himalayas, which inspired the name Cobra-La, and I would presume the setting for where Cobra-La live.
And Buzz Dixon is still apologizing for that. I'm saying that jokingly because he is still sort of rolling his eyes that when he said to Hasbro, we'll call it Cobra-La. And you're like, yes, that.
No, it was a joke. It was a placeholder. Very good. So shall we sort of wrap up Joe-age this one?
Yeah, that's hard. I think I give it a 6. As a fan, as an Andrew Wildman fan, as a grumpy Devil's Due lapsed reader who came back for this, and Hama writing the Storm Shadow Monthly, which was running I think at the same time. This is a 7. This is sort of higher. And as the kid whose life was changed by Transformers the movie and whose brain was turned sideways by G.I. Joe the movie, this is like an 8. Like, oh wow, as a functioning comic book narrative, it's good Wildman storytelling and art. It's not his best work. Seeley makes a lot out of far too much, and it all kind of works. But it's quite crowded, and it's a little bit the analogy that I give in the Andrew Wildman interview is this reminds me of Marvel Phase 5, the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 5, where the movies and the TV shows, right? Like I like Black Panther Wakanda Forever, but that movie, it's like, okay, something's going on with T'Challa and his sister and their mom and the guy in charge of the other group of Wakandans and the lady in charge of the Royal Guard. And she's got 2 friends who've got a little subplot. And also don't forget the kid from MIT who needs to build some armor that needs a showcase scene. And also there's the underwater guy, and he's got 2 lieutenants. And also there's a flashback of him as a baby. And it starts to become this is how I feel about a lot of Marvel and Star Wars stories in TV and movies in the last 5 years. What I would say is character creep, where I feel like the writers of the movies want to tell a story and have a few characters, and some of the studio and producer people are saying, right, but you also have to set up the next 2 TV shows or movies, or we also have to sell a bunch of action figures. So this team that's going to infiltrate this, stand in for the Death Star, narratively it wants 3 people. Can you have it be 7 people? Because then we can make more action figures and video game sprites. And if you're like a kid in the Midwest and you've got red hair, and we've got a team of 3 infiltrating this Death Star stand-up. If it's only 3 people, maybe none of them are going to have red hair. But if we've got 13 people on this squad, we can sell 13 new action figures, and more people in the audience will see themselves in this somewhere on screen.
And I feel like I just need to pause there a second, Tim, and just make a note as you bring it up that as we're concluding now and having not brought it up all episode, you talk about the Death Star. I think there is quite a big obvious parallel here between Star Wars, the Death Star blowing up, and Flint and the UFO going on their little mission on the inside of Galvatron and then blowing him up from the inside. I can't believe we didn't mention that before. Anyway, continue with your point, please.
And you have to spend so much time having a character come on and do a quick thing that's exciting that you don't get to tell a lot of story with the fewer characters that you might have started the story with. And so I look at G.I. Joe Transformers Black Horizon, and Hawk gets a little arc, Flint gets a little arc. Unicron is not interesting, and Unicron is interesting in Transformers the movie, and Unicron is scary in Marvel's US issue 75. And Unicron is not interesting or scary in this miniseries because he doesn't really do anything. He just shows up. He doesn't have a lot of presence. He doesn't say anything interesting. I know he says one or two things, but there isn't enough space for him to properly present himself. And I feel like in the same way that, in my Wakanda Forever example, it's like, oh man, like T'Challa and Shuri's friend sure gets to have a showdown with like Namor's lieutenants. Like they have a mini arc because like they get to fight a second time because of that first fight on the bridge outside MIT. It's like, okay. And here in G.I. Joe Transformers, it's like, oh man, like the monster pretenders sure show up and get to trash the Joes, but like, well, the G.I. Joe Laser Squad shows up for one panel and wraps that up. So I love it because as I said earlier, I like two of those three laser guys. It's fun. The third guy shows up. I want them to team up together. I want them to do something that's very specific, use their lasers. Blowing up a robot's head is pretty cool. But that sort of could have been done by anyone, like that could have been like Bazooka and Short Fuse and Downtown, like firing like little rockets and missiles from that hilltop. Like it's not sort of inherent to the story. It's just like, which characters can we slot in and show up either because it's cool in the case of Black Horizon, or because it's like, well, Ironheart's going to have a TV show on Disney Plus in a couple of years, so we got to make her show up somewhere.
Right.
So that's my very long way of saying 6.
I think I'm probably somewhere in similar. Maybe I'm going 6.5 for this. I was expecting going into this not to like it, so I have definitely been turned around on this. Each time I've read it, I've sort of found something new or something, some detail in the dialogue or something that has sort of I've not noticed on previous readings, and so it does stand up to and benefit from multiple readings, which isn't necessarily the case for everything. In terms of the scope and the vision and the number of characters and all of these subplots, you kind of expect it to be a noble venture that fails, but somehow they carry it off. And I think Tim Seeley's writing, is a big part of that. He does well juggling this enormous story and this giant cast of characters, and sticking in all of these extra bits of color and flavor for long-established fans with big knowledge bases of all of these different sort of characters. But it's got its flaws. The art is at times a little underdeveloped. The colors are not especially pretty to look at. Sometimes the plot does feel a little bit too condensed and could benefit from a little bit more room to breathe. So not perfect, but a noble endeavor that largely works. So yeah, that's kind of my thought process and where I'm landing on. So I think we're done with Black Horizon. Next time on Talkie Joe Disavowed, we will continue our look at the Disavowed era, and we are in that sort of closing run. It's the final stretch. Special Missions: The Enemy is the story that opens up that last stretch of Devil's Due, America's Elite phase. Special Missions: The Enemy sets up the next little run, which continues on into the Sins of a Mother arc, which starts with issue 21 before the 12-issue epic World War III begins at Devil's Due, America's Elite, issue 25.
But also, we haven't talked about Storm Shadow or the Sigma 6 comic.
Yeah, true. We've not run out of things. There are more things to.
We're going to squeeze more episodes out of Snake Eyes. Storm Shadow is not technically disavowed. in terms of publishing, it's Disavowed, but yes, we're going to squeeze a few more Devil's Due episodes out of this run, Talking Joe listeners.
And then when we're not talking about old issues from 2007, we'll be covering the very latest issues as they come out. So Real American Hero and more from the Energon universe. Destro, Scarlet, G.I. Joe, and more. You can find us in the usual places to get all of the latest news. TalkingJoe.co.uk is the website that has links to those places. We are on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, and we are on Patreon, patreon.com/TalkingJoe. So a big thanks to all of our backers, which include Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Shane, Simon, Chris, Joe, Craig, Frank, and Mike, who are getting early access to episodes. And there's quite a few of those at the moment, as well as some exclusive content. Tim, I almost forgot to give you your moment to shine. When you are not talking to me about G.I. Joe, where can you be found?
I write about G.I. Joe at my blog, realamericanbook.com. I have a brick and mortar comic book store just outside Boston, Hub Comics, and I have a website with my partners, which is video essays on TV and film at atomicabe.com.
Very good. So that is it. We are done. But until next time, remember that
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
laters.